5-star reviews. So leave 5-star reviews for the podcast that's about to talk about offensive line prospects, because it does matter, okay? These guys are not scoring your precious little fantasy points. I get that. But they're going to help the offensive ecosystem be better. If the offensive ecosystem is better, production will follow, and all of your selfish fantasy needs will be fulfilled. So this stuff is important. So basically how we're going to do this conversation here, Charles, is you mentioned Nate Tice earlier. He's our colleague. His takes are our takes. It counts. We're just going to go through his top 10 offensive line prospects from his big board and his positional rankings here. We're starting off with Olu Fosu, offensive tackle out of Penn State. And Nate is kind of a little bit out of left field here because Joe Alt is kind of, at least from what I've seen, the consensus offensive tackle one across most mock drafts in the industry. But the general consensus opinion with Fosu is he was a higher tier prospect coming into 2023 than he is leaving the season. But my question to you, Charles, is like, how much of this drop is mostly due to just injuries last year?
I think like all of it. See, this to me, I think there are some guys in this class who have gotten hit with prospect fatigue, like, you know, Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison to a degree. I would put Olu Fosu in that tier.
Interesting.
Because, you know, last year, I remember last year I was talking to a scout when Olu Fosu decided to go back to Penn State because he could have come out of the draft last year and probably been a top 3 or 4 pick. And, you know, he was like, man, why the hell would you go back with all this money on the line? You know, you could hurt yourself. You could get dinged up. You could fall down the draft board. That's kind of exactly what happened to him. But there are still games when he's healthy this year where he looks like the guy that people were excited about this time last year. And I would say the prospect fatigue is kind of like, okay, well, we know he's good, but he hasn't been quite as dominant. And we're gonna knock him down a few slots. The Ohio State game is a little rough for him, but even then you can see he's being hampered by something. So
yeah.
I would say if you're someone who likes to watch offensive line tape, I love it. It's like one of my favorite things still, only because I have enough domain knowledge as a former player and coach that can kind of let me cut some corners there.
Sure.
Watch the Iowa game, Penn State, Iowa. And I think you'll see why he has, like Nate has him as the number 1 tackle in the class. And I think he's still going to have an impact as a rookie pretty early. I like, to be clear, this tackle class is really strong. Mm-hmm. I don't think you could go wrong with any of like the top like 7 guys we're going to talk about today.
Crazy.
But Fosu, he's a pretty sure bet, I think, if he's healthy. To be one of those guys where you draft him, you put him at offensive line, and then you don't remember that he's there for like 10 years.
Yeah, to your point about how strong this offensive line class is, Nate has Olu Fosu as his 6th overall prospect in the class, and then that's followed by Joe Alt, Malik Neighbors, J.C. Latham, and Troy Fautanu. Like, I mean, and then Marius Mims at 11, and Graham Barton at 12. Like, it's just
right.
It's just so many good linemen in this class. Like, the receiver class is really strong, and I actually think the tackle class is even better. And that some of that is
I think it's better.
Some of that is just because, look, like there's 5 starting offensive linemen at a time, so there's more bulk of the position. But maybe on day, and that's where I think a lot of teams, the Chargers are a really good example where they've been like the most popular example where this conversation has happened is, do we weigh like, you know what, we could take Marvin Harrison Jr., we could take Joe Alt, and you know Nate has Olu Fosu ranked higher, but still, like, we could take a top tier offensive line prospect, because let me tell you what, buddy, we get back around the 2nd round, 3rd round, and they're not gonna be guys like this available at the offensive line position. It's very good at the top of the draft, but it just like that's not how the position works. There's not that strength on day 2 typically, but there is at wide receiver. So that's where like that debate is going to come down at this position. But anyways, yeah, I think Olu Fosu is the type of guy that you're going to take him and like plop him in as your left tackle. And if he hits, you're just never going to think about it again. Right. You're going to just starting tackle out there as a pass blocker, especially. So any of these teams that, you know, just in that, like, shoot, if you're Chicago, man, and like, I know Braxton Jones is a good player. Like, he's an acceptable left tackle, but like, why wouldn't you just want to drop one of these stud tackles in there? You know, like, I mean, obviously Tennessee at 7 is a very popular tackle pick, but there's just a lot of teams that, you know, a lot of teams need tackles. Everybody needs an offensive lineman. Fosu is a pass blocker. Feels like he could be a really good fit for a lot of these drop back teams.
Yeah. And I mean, even as a run blocker, when he's healthy, I think he looks pretty good there too. He's like 330 pounds and really light on his feet. It's I think he's a guy that's just going to prove so many people wrong when this draft season's over and be like, man, maybe we should not have the memory of goldfish and kind of remember what guys look like when they're healthy, because when he's healthy, he was talked about as a top 5 pick in last year's class. So that guy is still there, still a really good player. And, I think with him and Alt, I think it's a true, it's not a 1A, it's not a 1B. It's a true, these guys, to me, best tackles in the class, probably the safest picks long term. And, you get so much better. I think Jim Harbaugh put it perfectly at the owners' meetings where he was like, this is the positioning group that every other group on the team on offense relies on.
Yep.
And the offensive linemen, they have to be good by themselves or else the offense does not work. How many offenses have we seen with fantastic skill talent that don't have the offensive line help, and you can't do what you want? You can still have a quality season. You can still make the playoffs. But when it gets tough, you need your fat guys to beat up the other fat guys. It's the ethos of the sport, and this is a really good year for fat guys.
Yeah, I mean the non-Jim Harbaugh Chargers are a great example of, like, you have pass protection issues, the whole thing starts to kind of fall apart. So understandable why they might want to go one of these high-quality tackle prospects high in the draft. Let's talk about the next guy up there, Joe Alt. His dad played in the NFL. Was a great player in the NFL. He actually has not been like a tackle forever. He has a tight end background as Joe Alt. And like you see that reflected in his game, like the movement skills, the length, the athleticism. He's freaking huge. He just is another guy. It feels like everybody mocks him to the Titans. We talked about this with Daniel Jeremiah on the most recent mock draft Monday. And like, it just makes sense, right? Like, hey, we need a left tackle. You throw this guy in there and you never think twice about it.
Yeah, he's about as clean as they come as prospects do for especially for the offensive line. You can see, like, physically that he used to play tight end. Even though he carries his weight well, I mean, all these guys do. It's ridiculous how big these guys are now. Yeah. Even Joe Alt, he's 320 pounds and he looks like he's like 290. It's pretty crazy.
He's like 6'8", 6'9", right? I mean,
yeah, he's about 6'8". I think his dad was about 6'8" too. So 6'8", 320 pounds. He ran sub 5 seconds, where, if you're not as familiar with the thresholds of what makes a good time for an offensive lineman, if you're under 5 seconds in the 40-yard dash, like, you're moving, especially at that size. So he, and really, I think all these guys hit around 5 or sub 5 in the 40-yard dash. So it's a really athletic group of offensive linemen, and Alt, he's just the next piece. Pass blocking, fundamentally sound, run blocking. He's got the athleticism to do some crazy things. It's just, it's easy to see why he is the consensus offensive tackle 1, even if Nate doesn't have him in the same sphere.
Next guy up here, J.C. Latham, offensive tackle out of Alabama. He is, talk about huge. He's a big player. And Lance Zierlein of NFL.com, who his dad was an offensive line coach in the league for a long time, he has him ranked as the top offensive tackle prospect. Again, I think a lot of this is just preference and what you like out of your tackle, because you really can't go wrong seemingly with any of these guys. But J.C. Latham, talk to me about his game.
Okay, do you guys, you remember when Nick Saban first got to Alabama, and it was just all these gigantic offensive linemen like Andre Smith, Chance Warmack, a couple other guys they put in the NFL, the Quandro brothers. Latham's kind of closer to that. I don't know if he's maybe the most fluid pass protector in the world, but you don't have to be when you're the biggest and strongest player on the field. Like, and to be clear, I don't think he's a slouch in pass protection at all. I'm just talking, but in comparison to someone like Joe Alt, he might not be quite there. But when you're 6'6", 6'5", 340 pounds, it could move a little bit. All you have to do really is just get your hands on someone, and it's over. You can create enough time usually to allow the quarterback to get a pass off. And in the run game, people mover.
Yeah.
The SEC title game this year against Georgia, he's blowing guys up, moving guys out the way. And again, we talk about with Brock Bowers, those are future NFL players that he's doing it against. So I think he's a pretty special player. And it speaks to the depth of this class that someone like this is in contention for OT3. And even you can make an argument that some guys below the list are better than him because he's firmly like someone that you should draft in the top 12 of any draft class, and he might get pushed down the board because there's so many guys this year.
How is this guy not a Raider at pick 13? Okay, you talk about like people
probably because they get scared by Alex Leatherwood. That's probably maybe the only reason why.
Yeah,
the history on Nick Saban tackles is not great.
True. Yeah, I mean the Leatherwood thing. You're right. Like, dude, that was he cut by like the end of his second season or?
Yeah, or maybe even like before. It was sometime during the second season. The Raiders let him loose, and he never really turned up anywhere. After that, Evan Neal has not been good for the Giants.
Nope.
They've had some other guys, like Andre Smith, the guy who I mentioned before. He ended up playing for a long time, but was never lived up to like that 6th overall pick. So it's a little dicey. But I always struggle with like how much is that the player and how much of it is the environment that they come from. Because, for a while it was don't ever draft an Ohio State quarterback. And look at what CJ Stroud just did last year.
Also, dude, Bama corners was another thing. Like those guys, because, they play a lot of like off man and stuff and like whatever. And then we've got 2 Bama corners that are consensus first round picks this year. So like it just, I mean, they haven't played obviously, but yeah, the CJ Stroud Ohio State quarterback thing is, USC receivers, dude. I can't tell you how many times it was like a bit at the old NFL Network days where, USC because there's just so many USC people that went there. Like, yep, USC receivers. Am I right? Like they all stink. And then like Robert Woods ended up being good with the Rams. Juju was good with the Steelers. Like. Amon-Ra St. Brown is good in the league. Drake London is really good. So like it just these things happen, and sometimes it's just sometimes honestly I think it's just random.
Yeah, it's pretty random. But JC Latham, I wouldn't let the past Bama failure scare me on that one. I think he's a really good player and should be good for a long time.
Yeah, I just think again the Raiders at pick 13. You said people mover, and I thought like Antonio Pierce wants himself a people mover. So that would have to be. The owner calls down is like, yeah, we're not doing that. We just did that. But okay. Next one up here, Troy Fautanu. To me, when I watch Washington's offense, I see him, I highlight him. He just plays like a pro, man. Like he just looks like a professional offensive tackle, but there is some thought of like maybe he moves into guard. What spot do you see him playing in the league?
I think you start him off at tackle, move to guard if it's not working. I think he's got the athleticism, but I know some people get scared off by like arm length and dimensions, and he's not like your prototypical size. Like when we talk about Fashanu, all Latham, we'll get to Marius Mims in a second. He's not anywhere near as big as those guys, but he's still got the movement skills and I think the versatility to be kind of a plug and play. If you need a tackle, that could work. If you need a guard, he should be really, really good.
Yeah. Just kind of think of a landing spot for him. I just think, Seattle makes
We have him
sense.
as the Jets.
Jets? I mean, yeah, because like
we have him in the Jets in our latest mock draft. Yeah.
They just need offensive line depth, really. But like, I know fans will be pissed. It's like, oh, he's not going to start, but like he might end up starting, buddy. You never know.
He might. He look. Tyron Smith is not healthy all that often. Yeah, for sure. Morgan Moses, I think a world where like Morgan Moses, your swing tackle, is pretty good.
Yeah.
And after last year, I don't think any Jets fan can complain about having offensive line depth because last year got really bad for them.
All right, next guy up here, you mentioned him, Marius Mims out of Georgia. I mean, total freak show, but like, is he a project because there's not that like level of experience there?
No, I don't think he's a project in terms of the skill.
Okay.
Because when I watch the tape, I there's some times where I'm watching him play, I'm like, why is this not the first pick in the draft? I don't know. I don't think he's really special. And you look at the builds, guys who are like 6'8", 340, 350 pounds are not supposed to be built the way he's built, like a tight end.
Yeah,
it's kind of crazy.
He has such a like tiny waist. Honestly, which I feel so weird saying that, but like it just is what it is. Like when I'm charting like Georgia receivers, Lad McConkey and these other guys, there's sometimes like, because I'm charting like, are they on the ball? Are they off the ball? And like usually the first thing is like, all right, is there a tight end? Are they on the same side of the field as a tight end? I'm like, oh no, that's not a tight end. That's a freaking tackle. That's a Marius Mims.
Yeah.
He shouldn't look like that.
Yeah. The only pause for concern that I have is some of the injury stuff this year, and just overall, he hasn't played all that much for Georgia. Over the past 2 year combined, he played less than 700 snaps. So that's like not even a full season's worth of playing time. You're just looking at like a per game standpoint, but the talent is just through the roof. And if he can stay healthy and actually get through a full season and show the stamina that he can get through a full season, I think he could be a superstar at offensive line.
Yeah, it seems like at some point in the process he was kind of a late first round pick. Now I doubt that. I feel like he ends up going much higher than people think. Let's talk maybe even the Rams, by the way, pick 19. They could use a guy like to develop really at that tackle position. All right, number 6, offensive line prospect Graham Barton out of Duke. Seems like maybe the most versatile package of the bunch. I know Nate is high on his ability to potentially play all 5 positions. So Graham Barton, what do you think ends up happening with him?
I would put him, for me personally, I would probably put him over Fatanu, but it's the same kind of deal where you're like, okay, he could play left tackle. He's got the athleticism too, but not the prototypical size. So now you're talking about, okay, left guard, right tackle. And to Nate's point, I think he could play center too. So he's a really, really high floor player. And even if you go look at some of his matchups against some of the guys who are touted as draft prospects in this class, he usually holds his own. And the Duke film is kind of funny because even though Duke had a good team, it's still very apparent when an NFL prospect is on Duke's team and how they pop out. And I think that Graham Barton is kind of one of those guys.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I think it's going to be interesting to see where he ends up and just both from a landing spot perspective and a position perspective. Number 7, Talise Fuaga from Oregon State, another guy that maybe could slide inside to guard, maybe could be a tackle, but he just is a tone setter in the run game, really. So many teams, I feel like, in the back half of the first round that want to run the ball. Like I look at the Steelers. I even look at the Eagles, the Cowboys, these teams that want to maybe beef up their run game. He seems like a perfect prospect there.
Yeah, he was talked about earlier in the prospect process as like a top 10 pick, which kind of maybe appears to be smoke as we get a little closer to the draft. But still, firm first round prospects. The movement skills are pretty special for someone his size. I don't think he's quite as clean with his technique as I think he's still good because this is a really great offensive tackle class.
Right.
But we are comparing him to a Marius Mims or Joe Alt or Fashanu. I think he's a little step below. But still, he kind of reminds me of we've talked a lot about the Harbaughs and Chargers and Grant Roman. He kind of reminds me of Mike Iupati of the old 49ers, where just this huge road grading. It's a great throwback, right?
Yeah.
This is huge road grading offensive lineman that you probably don't want to play tackle all too much in the NFL, but as a guard, kick ass.
Yeah. Again, I can just see so many teams like the Steelers just come to mind. The 20th overall pick, the Steelers. Even if he ends up playing at tackle a little bit, I don't know. That one just makes a lot of sense to me. Next one up here, number 8, Kingsley Suame. Did I get that right? BYU offensive tackle.
I thought it was Suamataya.
Cool. Nate admits in his write-up of him that he will likely be kind of ahead of consensus on this player. He said, quote, "The best football is ahead of him. He's just 21 years old. He was a 5-star recruit." Do you agree with Nate on this one?
Yeah. He's also the cousin of Lions offensive tackle Penei Sewell. So
bloodlines, baby.
Football run. Bloodlines, baby. He's a monster. And I don't really know how else to put this, but he's just kind of a prick on the field. He's the guy that's going to go the extra mile to kind of see how much force he can inflict on his opponent. It's not always clean. He's got some technique issues to clean up, but I mean, he's 21 with a huge frame, great athleticism. When you're talking about the end of the first round or even early second round, he's the kind of prospect that an offensive line coach looks at and goes, "Oh, I can fix him.
I can fix him.
Yeah."
There's so many teams that could trade back up into the first round too. Like I keep coming back to Washington as a team with extra draft capital that's going to get a quarterback early on, and like that offensive line is not the type of like they have the pass catchers, but they don't have the offensive line that you really want paired with a young quarterback. Like maybe he could be a guy that they move back up in the first round for, and just again you get that kind of like kick ass like I can fix him thing. I don't know who their offensive line coach is there in Washington, but it's not a former Panthers guy because Ron Rivera no longer works for the team. So there we go. All right, number 9 prospect here, Jordan Morgan, another offensive tackle, potential offensive guard out of Arizona. My notes for him was just like the movement skills really, again, stand out with a player like him. I could see him being a fit like with the Detroit Lions, you know. I mean, just they have a good offensive line, but if they wanted to add another piece there, a team that really wants to use zone concepts and really get out on the edge, that's the type of thing I could see Jordan Morgan doing.
Yeah, he kind of reminds me, I think he could play some guard, but the way that I think of him, he kind of reminds me of like a classic pass protecting tackle that someone might say is a little soft. And I don't want to say that anyone is soft, because if you are an offensive lineman that can make it to this point, you are not soft at all. But in terms of like how his game translate, he gets bullied a little bit out there, but his feet are so good, his legs are so good, that it kind of gives him a high floor to recover. And I think that could work on the inside. It could work on the outside. And I think, you know, if you're talking about him as a guard, like he's a guy that could really be a weapon on the second level in terms of getting linebackers, getting secondary guys down in the open field. I think he's going to need a little bit of time to get stronger, but the base frame is there for a really good player.
Number 10, Jackson Powers Johnson, center, mostly probably prospect from Oregon. I really enjoyed watching Jackson Powers Johnson when I was watching Oregon's offense, working on Troy Franklin, stuff like that. At the Senior Bowl, he was just kind of throwing himself around. Nate's note from his write-up of him cracked me up. The first line is, he is built like a strong man from an early 1900s circus. I thought that was so funny because like if you watch him at the Senior Bowl,
barrel-chested.
Just the barrel chest like thing. He looks like how I think I stand, the barrel chest there, Jackson Powers Johnson. I'm trying to be like you, buddy. Anyways, I feel like, but I've heard mixed things on him, right? Because at one point it seemed like, especially after that Senior Bowl like week, that the media was really getting high on him. But then it seemed like, you know, what's come out from quote the league or like whatever, that people inside the NFL are not as high on Jackson Powers Johnson. So where do you stand in this divide?
I'm gonna be neutral here. I think he's a good player. I think end of round 1, like early round 2 is probably the right frame for him. He's been mocked to the Cowboys a ton. I mean, they need some center help.
Yeah, they do.
The biggest concern here is probably like he's had a ton of concussions in college, which, you know, we've seen guys who have been good and that kind of derails their career. I'm not going to say that happens to him, but he's a good player. I just think he's not like a transcendent center talent. You know, to me, he's not Alex Mack. He's not quite Travis Frederick, but still, he's a big upgrade over what a lot of teams have, and sometimes that's all you need.
I can see in my mind's eye, like I know this is not what maybe not what the fan base wants, maybe because they want a receiver so bad. But you mentioned end of first, early second, like Panthers at 33. Dave Canales, they've beefed up the interior of that line, right? They signed Robert Hunt, they signed Damian Lewis, but like Austin Corbett is currently slated to start at center after they understandably moved on from Bradley Bozeman. You know, maybe they make that transition. Corbett moves into center, whatever, but like just adding another kind of like tough guy in the middle. Like Dave Canales has said he's going to show you how stubborn he is with the run game. Their offensive coordinator, Brad Idzik, John Idzik's son, who connections, baby, bloodlines. He was talking about just the run game and the running back rotation. It really seems like that's an point of emphasis for that team. So like I could see maybe if he doesn't go in the first round, again, everybody wants receiver there at 33. He could end up just being like the pick there to give Bryce Young a center.
The Panthers, the more I know that pick makes sense, especially because, you know, Bradley Bozeman's out the door. They have a hole at center. They still, even with the signings that they've made, going to get Robert Hunt, going to get Damian Lewis, and trading for Deontay Johnson, a receiver, they still have quite a bit of work to do on offense. But you know what's even worse than their offense right now? Their defense. Like if Dude, the Panthers depth chart on defense, Derek Brown is much braver than me because I would have been holding out as long as I possibly could. You're going to have to Kirk Cousins me before I sign a long-term deal here, just based on the surrounding talent. So I think center makes a lot of sense from a structural standpoint as like the final piece to kind of solidify the offensive line. And maybe that's more important than going to get an impact player on defense. But so when we do our mock drafts, we have a section at the bottom for teams without a first round pick because people were crying for a mock draft.
How nice.
We had the 49ers trade out of the first round, and people were like, oh, well, I want to see the 49ers pick. I'm like, okay, fine, we'll start doing that for you. So the first pick is going to be the Panthers at 33. And I ended up giving them like a defensive player because I looked at their depth chart on our lads and I'm like, holy crap, who are these guys?
Yeah.
And I feel like if I'm saying that and I look at this stuff all the time, maybe they should draft a defensive player. But there's also, I do think there's some credence to the idea of like, okay, we've seen, I don't want to say a lot of shorter quarterbacks because there haven't been a whole lot of short quarterbacks in general. But the one shining example that we all go back to is Drew Brees with the Saints and how good the interior of that line was. That's probably the center is probably the final piece. And shoot, if Icky turns back into like the back half of rookie year Icky instead of what he's been for most of his career, then that could actually be a pretty decent offensive line. But they're still working. They're still churning and putting the pieces together.
Yeah, nobody cares what I think, but like if I was running the Panthers, I would just say forget it about the defense this year. They signed a bunch of dudes that like Giro Evero knows. Josie Jewell coached him before. Jordan Fuller's there's experience there. Ashawn Robinson. It's like just guys that have been in this system. I would just say like, hey, Evero, you want to be a head coach? You stuck around this year, like. Go make that defense the 20 of this group of guys. Like, go make that the 20th best defense in the league, and like that'll be a good thing for your resume. We've got to just beef up the offense. Like, we're just not going to care about the fact that our defense has no players. Just beef up the offense and like get that functional. And get to a point where you're not relying on Austin Corbett changing positions or Tommy Tremble is their starting tight end. That's a bad roster. That's a bad team.
It's so bad.
Let's move on here. Final player I wanted to ask you about. He is not in Nate's top 10, so we're calling this an honorable mention. I did just want to get your thoughts on Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma because Pete Traeger, who we talked about the mock draft on the previous episode with Jordan Vanek when we were talking about the Rams, he had him mocked 19th overall to the LA Rams, just and saying like, I guarantee this pick is going to be an offensive player if they don't like trade out of the first round, basically. So Tyler Guyton, a kind of honorable mention here. What do we think?
He's like the ultimate I can fix him prospect of these guys. All the tools in the world to be a rock star, dynamite left tackle. I just think the consistency is not always there with him. The technique's always there with them. Not always there with him. But, dude, you're talking about almost another guy, gigantic, 6'8", 320 pounds, jumped out the roof, ran well, had good agility times. Someone's going to take a chance on that in the first round. I wouldn't even be surprised if it's like in the top 20 because he's young, he's got the freak tools, and I think there's a pretty clear path for him to become a much better player than he is right now, which is why of all these guys that we just talked about, he's like the ultimate I can fix him prospect, where an offensive line coach is going to look at him and say, I can't teach being 6'8", 320, be able to move like that, but I might be able to teach you how to use your hands a little better, how to get into a pass set. And if we can combine those together, we've got something we can count on for, 8+ years.